They told her she was digging her own grave. To some extent, they fully believed that was true. The thing was, later on, that very grave became the salvation of those who had once mocked her. Montana Territory. Fall of 1891. The first time Evelyn Carr swung her pickaxe into the red hillside behind her property, her neighbor Orrin Doyle rode up, leaned his elbow on the saddle horn, and watched her silently for nearly 10 minutes before finally speaking. "You know this ground here won't hold anything, right?" he said at last, his voice a mix of curiosity and pity. "Folks have tried digging here a few times. Nothing but clay and shale." Evelyn didn't stop. The steady thud of the pickaxe against the dry earth rang out rhythmically. "I'm not looking for minerals," she replied curtly. "Then what are you doing?" Doyle asked, raising an eyebrow. "Building a shelter." Doyle let out a laugh, a cold, scornful sound that echoed across the empty hillside. His horse flicked its ears while Evelyn's old brown dog, Rust, lying beside the freshly dug pile of dirt, lifted his head and growled softly. "An underground shelter," Doyle shook his head. "Mrs. Carr, with all due respect, the cabin your husband left you is still standing, not even 100 steps away. It has a roof, 4 walls, a fireplace, everything a woman needs to get through winter. What more do you want?" Evelyn paused, set down the pickaxe, and wiped the dust from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her eyes met Doyle's without flinching eyes of someone who had seen more than men like him could imagine and endured enough loss to no longer care about cheap judgments. In the early chill of the autumn wind, she spoke slowly. "I need a place winter can't reach." Doyle snorted, tightened his reins, and turned his horse away. But just a few weeks later, the whole town would realize that Evelyn was the one who had seen the future more clearly than any of them. Isaac Carr, Evelyn's husband, had been a tough logger accustomed to facing wild animals, storms, and the vast frontier forests. But it was his underestimation of the weather, the silent enemy humans can't see, that took him from her. That day, he had only gone to check a few animal traps, less than 300 yards from the cabin. The north wind seemed like just an early-season chill, but it suddenly shifted and strengthened into what loggers called the breath of death. Isaac never returned. When the search party found his body the next day, his face was still turned toward the cabin as if he had been trying to take those last few steps home to his wife. The winter that followed was a stretch of days Evelyn could only describe as haunting. Each morning she woke in her own cabin, but felt as if she were sleeping inside an icebox. The steam from last night's soup pot froze solid. Even the thickest blanket wasn't enough to keep her warm. Everything from the wooden chairs to the small mirror was coated in a thin layer of frost, making the cabin feel more like a cold tomb than a refuge. One January night, Evelyn suffered hypothermia so severe she nearly lost consciousness. She remembered the sensation clearly, her body numb, but her mind terrifyingly alert, as if the cold wanted to push her out of her own life. That moment haunted her, not just because she almost died, but because she understood that the wooden cabin, the thing everyone trusted absolutely, was far more fragile than they thought. Deep in her memory, though, Evelyn recalled something most people in Red Gorge didn't know: the winters of her childhood in Kansas, when her Mandan grandmother taught her about earth lodges, semi-subterranean homes built from earth, ash, and roots, where the temperature almost never dropped below what humans could endure. Her grandmother had said wind can break trees, break houses, but wind cannot break earth. If you want to survive, rely on something stronger than wind. Years passed, and those words remained just a beautiful memory until Evelyn stood before Isaac's freshly filled grave. Looking at the empty wooden cabin, at the walls that had betrayed her on the coldest nights, Evelyn realized what few in Red Gorge would admit: wood doesn't stand against wind. Earth does. That realization, combined with the pain of losing her husband and the terror of the cold that had threatened her own life, became the quiet fire driving Evelyn to act. She no longer wanted to live in fear every time the wind howled through the door cracks. She didn't want to see anyone else, a stranger's child or a mocking neighbor, die from a cold that humans could completely prevent. It wasn't just defiance of nature. It was her challenge to prejudice, fear, and the limits frontier society placed on women like her. And from that moment, the decision to dig deep into the earth to save herself and perhaps the whole town was born. After that haunting winter, Evelyn's determination to build a new shelter didn't just spark, it grew into an almost instinctive drive. But unlike the men in the area, who typically built by gut instinct and oral tradition, Evelyn started with observation, measurement, and testing every detail like a true researcher. Each day she carried a small notebook, walking the hillside behind the cabin, recording soil moisture by grabbing handfuls and feeling their texture, measuring the slope with a homemade level, listening to the wind whistling through the pines to determine the prevailing winter direction. She discovered that the spot between 2 small rock outcrops had less wind, while the strip along the hillside held moisture well and resisted erosion, a promising location for an underground shelter. Her next step was what most Red Gorge residents saw as the clearest proof of her madness. Evelyn buried short bamboo tubes at various points around the hillside and measured the temperature inside them daily for 30 days. She did this morning, noon, and afternoon, rain or shine, meticulously recording every figure in her notebook, comparing surface and subsurface temperature fluctuations. The results were strikingly clear. Underground temperatures were far more stable than the outside air, varying little whether it was cold or hot, just as her grandmother had described the steady breath of Mother Earth. Yet Evelyn didn't stop there. On a trip to buy salt and flour at the trading post, she met an elderly Hidatsa man who had helped build traditional winter lodges. She asked him about reinforcing earth roofs, creating lowered entrances to retain heat, and designing vents that wouldn't clog with snow. The man studied her for a long moment, as if assessing her seriousness, then began explaining slowly and in detail. He drew a slanted vent pipe in the dirt, explaining that smoke rises but cold air, being heavier, pools at the low entrance, a natural principle that keeps warmth in without complex mechanisms. Evelyn took careful notes, knowing she was tapping into knowledge the rest of Red Gorge would never consider. Feeling it still wasn't enough, she went further. Evelyn rode to Fort Benton, where a small library held old military technical books. There she found basic geology texts, analyses of clay, load-bearing capacity, and a manual on semi-subterranean structures tested in the Midwest. Though the technical language was dense and academic, Evelyn patiently read every page, marking sections on preventing cave-ins, earth wall thickness, and integrating timber for load-bearing frames. Back in Red Gorge, she began drafting her first detailed blueprints. The entrance was designed as a cold trap corridor, a hallway lower than the main floor, so cold air would pool there instead of flowing into the living space. The main room ceiling would be reinforced with large timber beams, then covered with thick layers of compacted earth for wind blocking and thermal mass. A dual-vent draft riser chimney system angled at 37 degrees ran from the heating stove to the surface to exhaust smoke while maintaining steady airflow without strong winds reversing the draft. And when Red Gorge residents saw Evelyn standing in the yard with blueprints in hand, measuring with a small level staking depths, they became even more convinced she had lost her mind. Doyle delivered a line the whole town remembered: "Science for a woman is just make-believe." But Evelyn knew what she was building wasn't fantasy. It was the only preparation that could save her from another winter like the one that took Isaac. And more importantly, her mind had never been clearer. Once the blueprints were complete and measurements confirmed accurate, Evelyn entered the phase most in the area believed no woman could endure actual construction. From the very first pickaxe swings, she realized that no matter how carefully calculated on paper, nothing prepared her for the harshness of Montana's rock and soil. Barely 2 feet down, Evelyn hit a layer of fractured rock mixed with cement-hard clay, forcing her to switch from pickaxe to crowbar, taking nearly 2 days just to break the first large slabs. Each time a boulder broke free with a sharp crack, she felt the stark difference between theory and reality, between a clean drawing and the raw weight of untamed nature. When the depth exceeded knee height, she needed tamarack timbers to shore against collapse. But Evelyn worked alone, no one to hold beams or lift frames. She devised her own method, using ropes, a round log, and gravity to create a crude pulley system. Each time she hoisted a long timber into place, the full weight bore down on her small arms, leaving her shoulders aching so badly that at night she couldn't lie on her side and had to sit propped against the cabin wall to sleep. But the greatest difficulty wasn't physical strength, it was the constant danger lurking behind her. One afternoon, while cutting deep into the moist eastern wall, a soft pop sounded, the telltale sign any miner knows as soil starting to slide. In an instant of instinct, she threw the pickaxe aside and leaped away. A second later, a massive section of earth collapsed exactly where she had stood. A single breath slower, and Evelyn would have been buried under hundreds of pounds of soil. She knelt, gasping hands, shaking not from exhaustion but from nearly meeting death in the very way the town had always warned. Yet instead of quitting, she cleared the fallen dirt, examined the structure, and noted the cause. High moisture plus overly steep angle need wider walls and additional supports. That was something no one in Red Gorge expected. Evelyn didn't avoid mistakes, she analyzed them. She did what local miners and builders rarely did: learn from small failures to prevent major tragedies. Day by day, her hands filled with cuts, fingernails chipped, palms torn, and then calloused. Each evening, as she lit the oil lamp and looked in the mirror, her face streaked with dirt, hair tangled, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, she knew her body was breaking down. But each time she touched the smooth, compacted earth in the dugout, she felt something real, the steady warmth the wooden cabin could never provide. While she battled the earth, the town battled prejudice. The Doyle family passed by almost daily, arms crossed occasionally, tossing mocking remarks as if Evelyn were performing a farce rather than building something that might save their lives. Others, though silent, watched with eyes half pity, half amusement, as if following a play they were certain would end tragically. But Evelyn no longer paid them any mind. To her, every mistake recorded in her notebook was progress. Every erected timber a small victory, every pickaxe swing, an affirmation that she would not submit to winter's cruelty or to the pain that had taken Isaac from her. By the end of rough construction, when Evelyn stood inside a dugout large enough for a whole family, she no longer saw dirt and rock, she saw survival. She knew a long road still lay ahead, but most importantly, she had gone further than anyone in town had ever dared. When the rough dugout was sturdy enough to withstand gravity and Earth's surprises, Evelyn moved to the phase she considered the soul of the shelter, the heating system. This wasn't just about staying warm. It was a declaration that humans could conquer winter through intelligence, rather than endlessly burning firewood. Evelyn started with a principle the native elder had shared. Fire is only strong when it has the right path to breathe. So she built a small fireplace against the north wall using flat stones for a domed roof, then sealing it with clay ash mortar for airtightness. The chimney pipe she shaped herself from carefully kneaded clay strips, dried for days, then fired in an open pit in front of the dugout. The pipe had a calculated slant enough for smoke to rise, but not allowing cold air to sink back down. But what excited her most wasn't lighting the fire. It was the earth's heat retention. After completing the compacted earth dome roof and covering the ceiling, she embedded one thermometer in the wall and hung another outside. That morning, the air was only 28 degrees Fahrenheit, the ground frozen underfoot. Evelyn stepped inside the dugout. Her breath still formed faint mist, but when she checked the inside thermometer, she froze 53 degrees Fahrenheit. She hadn't lit a fire yet. It was the first time since Isaac's death that Evelyn felt a warmth that didn't come from wood, but from real hope. Just then, from the entrance, a young voice called Mrs. Carr. "Why is it so warm in here?" It was Sam Wheeler, the 4-year-old boy from the ranch down the road who sometimes helped his father with livestock. Sam had only passed by out of curiosity when he saw smoke from the clay pipe, but what he saw inside left his eyes wide with wonder. Evelyn showed him the thermometer, explaining that deep earth holds natural heat, and winter can't take away that stability. Sam's story quickly became a small anecdote easily ignored by adults, but it was the first real spark, tiny but genuine, letting Evelyn know her project wasn't just a mad experiment. It had already impressed one person, a boy honest enough to see truth without prejudice blocking it. And sometimes that first recognition, even from a child, is enough to give strength to someone fighting a whole community alone. Evelyn knew the road ahead was long, with many skeptical eyes waiting for her to fail. But for the first time, she no longer felt she was fighting alone. Because deep in the earth, she had just witnessed clear scientific proof that her structure could endure, and more than that, it could save lives. After the successful heating test, Evelyn allowed herself no rest, not even a single day. She understood that a shelter is only truly safe when the interior, the space humans live in daily, is cared for as meticulously as the structure. So she entered the finishing phase, where every patch of earth, every plank of wood held life or death meaning. First, she laid the floor. Though compacted earth was stable, Evelyn wanted a clean, dry surface for long-term moisture resistance, so she sawed thin pine boards herself, laying them tightly over a leveled gravel base. The wood floor not only felt warm underfoot, but also prevented ground moisture from rising during long winter days. Next, she treated the earth walls with a special plaster, a mixture of clay, chopped straw, and wood ash, blended in the exact ratio her grandmother had taught. When brushed on, the strokes created faint patterns, but it adhered firmly. This plaster not only prevented cracking and moisture, but also reflected heat better than raw earth, helping maintain stable interior temperature. Then came storage, which she considered as vital as sleeping space. Evelyn installed wooden shelves along the west wall, the driest side. The shelves were shimmed with small wood blocks so they didn't touch the earth wall directly, preventing food from getting damp or moldy. She arranged jars of cornmeal, salt, dried beans, and herbs as if organizing the entire winter into order. The sleeping area was also carefully planned. Instead of a bed on the ground, like in the cabin, Evelyn chose a suspended bunk style she had seen at frontier stations. Using a few beams and a small mattress, she created a bed about 2 feet off the floor. The raised bed ensured less ground noise, no cold moisture rising, and minimized vibration from strong surface winds. But what she was most proud of was the moisture venting system using volcanic rock. On a trip a few miles away, Evelyn had collected a small sack of pumice fragments, light porous stone with natural moisture-absorbing properties. She packed pumice into small wall cavities connected to a secondary vent in the corner. When humidity built up, the pumice absorbed it and released it gradually through the vent, keeping interior air dry, something ordinary wooden cabins could never achieve. Finally, in early December, Evelyn moved all essentials into the dugout: a few thick blankets, the old set of pots, her only good oil lamp, a small trunk with clothes, and Isaac's keepsakes. She cleaned the wooden cabin, latched the door, and descended into the dugout, not with anxiety, but with the feeling of entering something more steadfast than herself. That first night in the dugout, Evelyn blew out the lamp, lay on the suspended bed, and listened to absolute silence. No wind seeping through cracks, no wood contracting and cracking in the cold, no biting chill creeping through layers of clothing like in the old cabin, only a soft, steady warmth enveloping her from all sides like arms she had lost long ago. While outside, all of Red Gorge gossiped that Mrs. Carr had finally gone completely mad by moving underground. Evelyn only smiled faintly in the darkness, because for the first time in years she was no longer afraid of winter, and she knew this winter would prove she was right. Everything changed just 2 weeks after Evelyn moved into the dugout, when the Montana sky suddenly darkened on what seemed a calm afternoon. The old-timers in the area still spoke of a rare kind of storm they called the White Reaper, a blizzard, not only cold but carrying winds strong enough to rip roofs clean off. But no one had seen it in many years, and most thought it was just a tale to scare children. Yet that day, the northern horizon turned steel gray in minutes, and the wind began howling through Red Gorge Valley like the prolonged wail of something inhuman. When the storm truly hit, it gave no one in town time to prepare. Winds gusted from 65 to 80 miles per hour, whipping snow into blinding spirals. Visibility dropped to near zero, a complete whiteout where people standing 3 steps apart couldn't see each other. Temperatures plummeted to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and with wind-chill skin felt like 70 degrees Fahrenheit, a level that could cause frostbite in under 2 minutes. In the wooden cabins, winter didn't knock, it burst inside. Cracks in the logs that villagers thought they had sealed all fall became pathways for wind, creating knife-like drafts. Doors rattled violently, hinges screamed, many latches torn open by gusts. Children who were used to cold began shivering uncontrollably, many convulsing as their bodies couldn't cope with the thermal shock. Beside fireplaces, water at the edge of stew pots began to freeze, an almost unimaginable sight happening right before their eyes. Some tried to keep fires going, but the abnormal winds caused reverse draft gusts, sucking smoke back down the chimney, filling cabins with smoke and forcing doors open for ventilation, which meant inviting deadly cold inside. On outlying ranches, the horror was even clearer. A few livestock left in yards, while owners frantically boarded windows, froze solid in minutes, thick ice forming on their bodies. By the storm's peak, some died, standing bodies frozen like statues. People couldn't go out to save them. Simply stepping outside for seconds could knock a person down and disorient them in their own yard. Meanwhile, underground Evelyn sat on her suspended bed, listening to the storm like blind rage sweeping the surface. Those sounds no longer terrified her as before: wind screaming through the entrance, snow pounding the earth, roof distant crashes of falling trees. But all were muffled by thick earth, becoming distant echoes, as if she were hearing someone else's story rather than living in the heart of the storm. Inside the dugout, the temperature held steady at 56 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough to write research notes bare-handed without shivering. Her breath no longer formed white clouds. No cold drafts slipped under the door. No cracking timber signaled roof collapse. Only calm enveloped the space, as if Mother Earth were cradling her. It was the first time in her life Evelyn experienced a major blizzard without her heart clenching in fear. No memories of Isaac being swept away by wind intruded. No image of the frozen cabin startled her. For the first time she thought not of death but of life, of how this structure called a mad grave was protecting her better than any wooden house Red Gorge ever boasted. But she didn't yet know that on that storm night, desperate eyes were groping through the white curtain and faltering steps were heading toward the tiny clay chimney pipe, emitting a faint, warm glow from the ground. The storm wouldn't just test Evelyn. It would test the entire town, and the answer to who was right and who was wrong would be clear when the sun rose. At the storm's peak, when outside there was nothing but howling wind and thick white snow ready to swallow the world, the first desperate people to reach Evelyn were the Doyle family, the very ones who had mocked her most. Their cabin roof was torn off in one violent gust, exposing frozen rafters. The temperature inside dropped so fast that their little daughter Marcy began convulsing from cold. In panic, Orrin Doyle spotted something he had dismissed for weeks as nonsense: Evelyn's small clay chimney emitting a faint orange glow from underground. With no other choice, he carried Marcy, supported his wife, and plunged into the snow like hunted prey. When they reached it, he pounded on the dugout door, voice breaking in the wind. "Mrs. Carr, please open up!" The heavy earth door opened and warmth poured out like a miracle. Evelyn pulled the family inside, closing the door before another gust hit. She didn't reproach or question. Instead, she acted exactly as the native elder had taught. First, she wrapped warm blankets around Marcy using steam from a pot set at a distance to moisten the air. She knew well, never rewarm too quickly. When Doyle tried to give his daughter hot water, Evelyn gently stopped his wrist and shook her head. "That's dangerous." "Let me." Then she fed Marcy warm water by the spoonful, massaging major pulse points to restore warm blood to extremities. About an hour later, a second knock sounded. This time a lost hunter face, purple beard frozen in clumps. He managed only to look at Evelyn before collapsing at the threshold. She and Doyle dragged him in, placed him near the stove, and began indirect warming to melt ice on his clothes and hair. His breathing was so faint it barely moved his chest, but gradually pink returned to his lips. Near midnight, when everyone thought no one else would venture out, a third urgent knock came so weak Evelyn almost missed it. Outside was a young mother, face deathly pale, clutching a newborn wrapped in blankets already stiffened with snow. Her eyes were nearly closed, but she managed. I can't go any further." Evelyn took the infant, feeling tiny hands cold and unresponsive. She immediately tucked the baby against her own body, using her own warmth, the only way to save a newborn in such conditions. The mother was laid beside Marcy, while Evelyn held the infant close until its faint breaths warmed. But the night wasn't over. Before dawn, two more figures staggered up, two school children, about 10 and 12, trapped on the way home when the storm hit. Their clothes frozen, stiff fingers too numb to move. Evelyn pulled both inside, wrapped heads and feet in dry cloths, and placed them near the hot water pot. She instructed Doyle and the other adults in circulation: massage, never rub hard, only gentle strokes to avoid shock when blood returned to extremities. The children cried from the burning pain as warm blood flowed again, a heartbreaking sound but a sign of life. For 3 full days the storm raged on. Evelyn's small dugout sheltered a total of 10 people, 10 lives hanging between survival and death. She rationed food-adjusted heating cycles to prevent overheating or chilling, and barely slept. When the storm finally broke, people emerged one by one, eyes red but filled with gratitude. Red Gorge lay in ruins, many cabins collapsed entirely, livestock dead everywhere, trees snapped like battlefield casualties. No one spoke for long minutes because everyone understood without Evelyn's dugout all 10 of them, and perhaps more, would not be standing here. And in that moment, as weak morning light filtered through thick clouds, Red Gorge had to admit a truth they had denied for months: the woman they had mocked had saved them from a winter that would otherwise have become their common grave. When the White Reaper blizzard finally retreated, leaving a heavy silence as if the world were holding its breath, those who had sheltered in Evelyn's dugout stepped outside with legs still trembling but hearts full of gratitude. But the moment their feet touched the ground, shock swept over everyone. Red Gorge was no longer the familiar small town. It resembled a white cemetery. Many cabins were buried so deep, only a roof corner protruded, some completely flattened into chaotic wood piles. Tall pines, decades old, lay across roads, trunks snapped as if broken by giant hands. The Wheeler livestock barn was only splintered frames, snow-filled inside, not a single animal alive. The people of Red Gorge stood frozen in that scene, feeling as if they had stepped from safety deep in the earth into a post-apocalyptic world. Those who had mocked Evelyn, especially Orrin and Martha Doyle, couldn't hide the shame plain on their faces. They knew that without her, their daughter, their family would not be here. Martha approached, eyes red, hesitating as if unsure how to begin. Finally, she managed only 2 words: "Thank you." And Orrin, who had laughed at her countless times, stood silent a long while before speaking, voice choked: "Mrs. Carr, I was wrong." Evelyn only nodded without reproach because she knew winter itself was the harshest teacher, and this time it had taught the entire town a lesson no one would dare forget. A few days later, as snow began to melt slightly, the town gathered in the large remaining grain barn. The meeting atmosphere was heavy but resolute. People began asking questions no one had considered before. Why did our wooden cabins fail so badly? How could Evelyn's dugout stay warm for 3 whole days? What must we change so we don't lose anyone else? A draft for winter safety reforms. was proposed, including new rules for reinforcing cabins, building communal shelters, and mandatory long-term fuel storage. The most surprising moment came when town leader Lawrence Cooper stood and addressed the entire community. "None of us understands earth and wind like Mrs. Carr. If she agrees, I propose she guide us in building new shelters." The room fell silent for seconds before nods and voices of support rose. For the first time since Isaac's death, Evelyn felt something she had long lost: genuine respect from people. Not pity, not curiosity, but recognition for her knowledge, her perseverance, and the months she worked in silence while everyone turned away. From mocked outcast, she became guide. And Red Gorge understood that if anyone could help them rise from the ashes of this winter, it was Evelyn Carr, the woman who saw danger before anyone else and acted before it was too late. After that fateful town meeting, Evelyn's journey didn't stop at saving 10 lives in the White Reaper blizzard. It opened an entirely new path, the path of spreading knowledge. At first, Evelyn only intended to share a few techniques so nearby families could reinforce their homes. But demand far exceeded imagination. Word of her dugout spread to neighboring towns via traders, then beyond Red Gorge, reaching remote ranches where cold was an old enemy. In early spring the following year, Evelyn officially held her first free class on earth shelter engineering, a term unheard of at the time. The class met in the old barn with a chalkboard she built herself, compacted earth models she made, and basic tools. Yet over 30 people attended: farmers from Elk Ridge, hunters from Marble Peak, even a Swedish immigrant couple who rode 3 days by wagon just to hear her. They brought notebooks, pencils, and a respect Evelyn had never felt before. She taught about clay load-bearing structure, thermal mass for stable heat retention, wind direction, and cold trap corridor techniques to reduce heat loss. She described precisely the mistakes she made while digging the near-fatal collapses, the hard-won lessons no book taught. The way she spoke captivated everyone, not just the knowledge, but the strong belief that anyone could protect themselves from winter if willing to learn and work. The spread was so rapid that people began calling Red Gorge the town of warm dugouts. A month later, a former Army engineer named Edwin Mapes, who had served at Plains outposts, sought Evelyn out. He brought drafting notebooks and rare seriousness. Mapes attended her class 3 straight days and concluded, "What you've done could become the standard for the entire Northwest." He set to work optimizing Evelyn's designs into standardized drawings: wall thickness, clay straw ratios, chimney slope, air volume ratios. The two worked for weeks, exchanging ideas, testing, refining. The result was a complete earth shelter model buildable even by those with no construction experience. News of the standardized design reached newspapers. Many native communities blended their traditional techniques with Evelyn's design, creating unique, effective hybrids. After 5 years, the number astonished the region: over 120 shelters built to Evelyn's design across Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. Each varied slightly, but all rested on the core philosophy she taught: Earth does not betray people. Earth holds warmth. Earth is the final wall against winter. Evelyn never charged for drawings or lessons. She accepted only firewood, some grain, or help repairing her barn roof when needed. To her, knowledge was communal, not for profit, and that only increased people's respect. Evelyn's legacy grew with each new winter. Families who survived because of her passed the story to their children. Her students taught others. The shelters rose as proof that sometimes one person daring to be different, one person daring to dig deep when the world says stay on the surface, is enough to change an entire region's fate. But the story wasn't over. The rest is how Evelyn herself viewed her legacy, not with pride, but with the calm of someone who simply did what was right when the world chose to look the wrong way.